sometimes I feel like human design is like some sort of virus that's been like injected into into the simulation. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's like, I feel like, from a karmic level, well, it's all written anyway. And human design is just showing this kind of very base level of things. I think good predictive astrology can show you what's going to happen and what, like, literally just in detail. I just want to get them in alignment with themselves so that they can accept themselves, love themselves, and be like, all right, well, it's good to be me.
John Cole is a certified human design analyst, a 2-4 ego projector, and a man with over 3 decades of serious astrological study under his belt. His work bridges Vedic and Hellenistic astrology and human design. And what I love about John's approach is that it's not just about fortune telling or spiritual fluff. It's about how these systems can radically reframe your understanding of your character, your limitations, and your path through life. In this episode, we'll get into how tools like astrology and human design offer profound psychological benefits by teaching you to accept your nature, navigate your karma, and stop waging war against your own wiring. We talk fate, free will, and why knowing your mechanics might be the most liberating thing you can do for your mental health. So let's get into it.
So from what I understand, you studied and did Jyotish for quite a while, and then you've moved on to doing human design as a preference. So how did that come about?
I started studying astrology years ago. I'm 55 now, and so I got into it in my early 20s, so like 30 years ago. And it was because my mother was into astrology, and so I got introduced to it at a pretty early age through my mother. I went to her astrologer. This was like Western, kind of modern Western psychological astrology, and anyway, that kind of kicked it off. And then at some point, I wanted to get more into predictions, basically. I wanted rules. I liked kind of the logical, mechanical kind of astrology. And I did get a lot out of the psychological kind of modern approach. I think there's a lot of value in some of that stuff. But that's what drove me to Vedic astrology in the first place. And I was also just interested in Indian culture. And so, and kind of the Indian spirituality. And so it was all kind of a package that I was, exploring. So I started off I would say it was kind of mid-90s studying Vedic astrology. I was living in Los Angeles, and there was a Vedic astrology school that I was going to regularly and some teachers I was working with. And I bought all the books and was going to the conferences and started, early. I guess I was probably in my 20s, kind of started practicing with it and, getting some clients and doing readings. And I can say I really enjoyed the Vedic system, the Vedic tradition, and the detail, the logic, the kind of the precision of it. I had a real hard time with the sidereal zodiac. I couldn't quite get traction with it. And it just never really landed in my own experience with my chart. And then I was working with people and I wasn't feeling like I was getting traction with them. Some stuff was kind of working and some stuff wasn't. And so around that time, I pivoted from Vedic astrology to Hellenistic astrology because they were very similar. They kind of overlapped in a lot of ways. There's a lot of the same techniques, approaches, mechanics. And so I had started studying Hellenistic because they were using the tropical zodiac.
Yeah.
But I always kind of missed the Vedic, I missed, again, the kind of the comprehensive tradition, the spiritual
ecosystem of it. Yeah. It links to spirituality and, your remedies and your mantras and everything. It just lock in so much to all of that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I was like, damn, if only I could, I just want to use the tropical zodiac. It's my preference, but I really appreciate everything else about it. So I was just kind of jumping around trying to study, whatever systems I could, try to find something that worked consistently. I was all about like practical results. I just wanted to know it was going to hold up. Probably around 2010, 2011, I found out about Ernst Wilhelm and his whole approach, which is basically, he reads Sanskrit. So he was going back to the original Vedic scripts and looking at them and kind of reinterpreting some stuff. And his position, along with a handful of other, I guess, Western Vedic astrologers, is that the tropical zodiac was actually the original zodiac. Right. There was kind of a division that happened.
Yeah.
And I know there's pretty
tropical Vedic now. There's like Kurzak and Wilhelm, and those guys do Vedic with tropical zodiac.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
So I ended up in that camp. I ended up, basically doing a lot of study with Ernst Wilhelm and kind of pivoted over, started working with the tropical zodiac Vedic techniques. He does use the sidereal zodiac for the dasha calculations.
Sure.
Stars.
The nakshatras are, well, they're not zodiac,
exactly,
but they stay in the same place.
He has this rationale for it. And then when I went back and I started using again, I was like, okay, now this stuff is starting to kind of click for me and make sense. And so that's kind of where I'm at now, is I still do use astrology quite a bit. Human design came in the picture, and there was a time period where human design kind of showed up. I guess it was 2015. Once I found that, I kind of just like dove completely in, immersed myself, and kind of put astrology kind of on the side just for a little while. But then I started bringing astrology back in. The way I'm working with it now is human design is showing us something like very essential, fundamental, kind of a very base level reality that you could say our imprint on kind of the most essential energetic mechanical level. But it doesn't really show us like what's happening in the world. It doesn't really fill out a lot of the other details. It's not really a predictive system. You can draw conclusions from it and you can kind of make predictions, but that's not really what it is, in my opinion. And so I feel like they're really just different things. They're two different frameworks, two different lenses we can kind of use and look through depending on what we're doing, what we're looking for. I feel like there's only a little bit of overlapping. I mean, obviously the planets are the overlapping piece. It's the same planets, it's the same birth time. From that point on, we're really looking at, I think with human design, a much more fundamental level of things. And then astrology is kind of covering everything else up here in a way.
Same time,
And so if you put both of those together, I'm finding that you have a lot to work with.
I suppose it looks like human design is almost like psychological astrology gone to its endpoint, but it doesn't seem that you have like predictive analysis. I think there's like cycles in human design. I thought that maybe the human design equivalent of timing events similar to the Hellenistic and Vedic tradition. But
yeah, I have found value in both. I tried to do everything with astrology, and then before human design, and then when human design came along, I just wanted to immerse myself completely in that and kind of put astrology aside. And then I realized that human design can't address everything that I'm looking at, or I want to know, or I want to work with, or my clients do. And so I ended up bringing in astrology again, and I'll use Vedic techniques. I'll use Uranian techniques. Sometimes I'll use modern interpretations in some ways. So we brought in Ernst to talk to him once. And so we also talked about human design. We brought in Gary Kristen, who's kind of like the lead Uranian guy at this time. He runs Astrolabe. And then so there's another astrologer I've had on there twice, who's a close friend of mine named Maria Matus.
Right.
And she's got a pretty extensive background. She teaches astrology. She went to Kepler College. She knows her stuff. She's really into historical astrology. Well, she's doing some interesting work that I think is kind of a blend of modern and traditional, but it's really holding up well. And so I've been kind of getting back into some of her work, re-inspired at some of the astrological stuff. The Ernst stuff re-inspired me. Maria's stuff does. I do like the Uranian. So I feel like I have to do both. I mean, and it's, yeah.
Right. Because the question is really like which one would have more psychological benefit and value to someone, because it's hard to say. Even on the human design side, you might be able to say, well, you should make decisions like this, and this is how the not self is going to work for you. But then you might not have the same level of insight as on tropical Vedic, where you could say, oh, well, you've got a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in this house, so this can indicate this. Like, it seems that the tropical Vedic astrology can archetypally show some things which human design might not be able to show.
I agree,
And you have obviously been doing human design, so it's with the decision-making process and with the whole process of this deconditioning, have you actually seen that work for you and your clients? Like, how have you actually, does that bring benefit to your life, or does it just make things clearer?
Well, that is an interesting question. I would say that the answer to that is, I think it depends on the person and how they're holding it and working with it. More and more, I'm looking at human design and astrology in a way. These are just maps. They're like these frames of reference that we can pick up, we can look through. we can kind of overlay that over our life in a way. It's like we're living our life, but then we can reference the planets. We can reference our body graph. We can reference, the transits, whatever's going on. And both of these systems, they get us more in touch with nature. They get us more in touch with kind of being a part of something larger than ourselves, or, kind of in a way the program, and as it's called in human design, or the planetary cycles in astrology, or whatever it is. But I feel like there's value in that. But people, what I'm seeing a lot of, and I see it in both astrology and human design, I see people, mistaking the map for the territory, trying to eat the menu in a way. They start trying to live their life by human design, as opposed to using human design as a reference at times with certain signposts that can be really helpful and point you back to your maybe something that's more essential or true about your nature, and help you kind of work some stuff out. You get to see things in a different vantage point, realize what's actually going on there mechanically or energetically. I feel like all that's very positive. That can be really helpful for anybody, but I see a lot of people kind of getting all twisted up about it.
Yeah, the benefit being the psychological framework to navigate things, certainly for self-understanding. Sure, I can definitely see the benefit of that, like having the psychological map saying, oh, well, that might explain this might explain that. And I get what you're saying with people will take the human design things too literally. They'll be like, well, I'm a projector, therefore I'm going to do this. Whereas it seems to be more positively used for, your big decisions. If you can say, oh, you're a projector and you've got emotional authority, but oh yeah, I remember that. So if I'm doing a big decision, I'll just ride the wave.
I think the information is out. Like you can find it. You go out on Facebook and people are sharing all sorts of stuff out there, and the information is all out there. And so I think there are a lot of people who are doing self-study, who have, full access to Ra's teachings and the information as it came through. Ra made this attempt at kind of a formal educational system. Like he wanted to really almost create like a university or a college of human design.
Because I'm not one of these people who just say, oh, this is straight up a cult because it's, paying for money. Any kind of hierarchical system of information will have a similar structure. I get that. If you were to use it to psychologically benefit someone, you'd just be using the basic information, like your open centers, fixed centers, profile, type. And I suppose you've mentioned you're going to blend it with the tropical Vedic, because the value of human design seems to be in those basic things. And then it's just going down into really like academic minutia stuff as soon as you keep going down. I've seen some of the Facebook posts and it can get endlessly esoteric to a point where it just doesn't make any sense anymore. Whereas I find with astrology actually seems to be more consistent in its principles and information. Whereas human design, you can go on these Facebook pages and it can branch out into all sorts of like really esoteric stuff. You would actually blend the two in your clients, your session to psychologically benefit someone.
Yeah, I mean, maybe not necessarily at the same time, but like it's like different tools for different jobs. It's like, so I don't want to work with anyone exclusively with astrology that I haven't worked with in human design. I think human design provides a practical foundation and starting point. And so if I'm going to work with someone, I'm going to start with human design before I do any astrology. And then if they come back and they start saying, well, like, what about this? What about that? And they start asking like questions that astrology can answer or can tell us a lot more about. That's when I'll pull up their chart. 70% of what I'm doing is probably human design, and I'm pulling about 30 or 40% astrology as needed based on whatever's going on with a particular client. What human design can show, it's showing kind of like the mechanics, like the underlying kind of energetics in for oneself, in one's relationships that one's encountering. Those are the same planets. They're the same planets in the solar system, obviously, but we're looking at it on a different kind of scale, level, vantage point. I mean, after I studied astrology for 20 years and I couldn't find a lot of what is in human design in any astrological system, right. And then it ended up being kind of a big missing kind of puzzle piece or link for me. I was like, oh, now I kind of get what's going on with this aspect of my reality. So now I can go back and I can go kind of explore these other realms.
Yeah, I totally agree. You can look at an astrological chart, but the clarity of telling that someone's a projector versus a reflector, that those fundamentals of human design, that could really change how someone looks at their own chart, right? When you're using human design primarily, is 80% of the psychological value really in the type, strategy, authority, and the variables? Because I feel like those are the main pieces and the centers. Then you could extract enough kind of truth and psychological value for the person out of that reference. As you say, questions that can only be answered by astrology, like what about my I don't know, career or something, look at the 10th house, look at the 6th house sort of thing. Then you use the human design lens. So, like you're a projector, that'll explain why you have less energy. But like you've got these promising placements for your work, your 6th house, your money, 2nd house. So you're filtering both at the same time, if that makes sense.
The 80% of the value, kind of to answer your question, I feel like it's exactly what you're saying. It's the most surface level stuff. It's just like, do you understand how your aura, your body's energetic field works? You know, do you understand what it means to have an inner authority, and do you have any relationship with it? Do you understand what you have defined and what you have open? You know, do you know what your profile is about? Like that, there's so much to work with that. And that information is pretty much like free and out there, and people can pick it up in like months. Oz lectures are out there with that information. You can find that information on Facebook.
The more information there is, it's almost like a diminishing return on the potential psychological value, because less and less of it, as it gets more esoteric, is actually being tested, and more of it just becomes raw belief and dogma at that point. You know, if someone on Facebook said like, "Oh, you're a 3-2, so you gotta fucking live underground," people would be like, "Yeah, absolutely." You know what I mean? It sort of becomes like, well, this is completely unverifiable, completely untested. The more and more esoteric and down the rabbit hole it goes. So you're essentially using I won't say basics, but it's like the fundamentals. You can weave so much psychological value out of that for your client, and then you can look through. You can also filter that through your tropical Vedic astrological lens to kind of confirm your suspicions or belief, or get a little bit more clarity on an issue. That's really cool that you are actually blending both. How do you market this for like the average person without it being hyper esoteric? Because there is so much psychological validity and truth that can really help people and be like, oh, that's exactly why I am that way. But they don't necessarily want to hear from an astrologer or a esoteric woo-woo, human design person. How do we market that value that is there for the taking, really, to people? People will be happy to go to a therapist, let's say, because psychotherapy is more normalized. People will pay for that. There could be more psychological truth and mental health benefit from combining these techniques, but how do we market it? No psychotherapist is going to say, "Can you please give me your birth time so I can pull up a chart?"
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I feel like things are kind of shifting in a couple different ways. I actually think there's an increasing need for human design informed therapy, or whatever modality that takes human design into consideration. So I think that would be a very strong motivator to go work with somebody, is that they understood that, okay, I'm a reflector, I'm a projector, I'm a manifesting generator, and they have some idea about, maybe they know something about profile, and they know about that you have emotional definition. I think those things are like huge shortcuts in whatever area of life. If you're dealing with other people and you're trying to support people, or you're in some sort of like working with someone psychologically, I could be wrong. And maybe human design is going to explode again and jump to another level. I don't know that this market, like this reader market, or analyst market, it's like, I'm not quite sure everything should look like that. I'm seeing human design more and more as almost like a general education. It's a language that people can learn to speak. It's a framework that people can learn to use. And I think it's supposed to be used. I think it's best used in the context of one's daily life. It would be great if there were like personal trainers who understood human design. It's like a whole nother area of business. It's like, someone's running a gym, and then you're like, oh, you're a projector, you're a generator. Okay, I'm going to do different workets for you guys.
Do you think it could get to that point? Do you think that it could be accepted by the general market? Wouldn't that take like 100 years or something? Could we get to that point?
I hope so. I think things are kind of accelerating as we head into the next couple of years. And there's the whole 2027 kind of thing. I think we're already seeing it. I think this old way, these old institutions, these old models, they're kind of breaking down already. And I think we're going to end up in a world that you just kind of described, where it's like, hey man, it's not about the information. It's not about who's got the most interesting, deep or subtle, nuanced information. It's like, it's going to be about, I think, the practitioner, the frequency that they embody, the quality of the work they do. It's going to be about a lot of other things.
Post 2027, to trust in the normal structures and authorities that have been. You're saying that the market will essentially shift towards a more quote unquote woo-woo stuff because they may actually find more value in it. Not just human design. Like I could see maybe people stop. You can see people stop trusting doctors after the last couple of years. Like, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to, read my Ayurveda book and do that, right? So it's
sure.
saying it's like the market is just swinging. So no one will have trust in the historically authoritative bodies, whether that's in health or economics or psychology. Is that essentially what 2027 is saying? It's like your collective market, as it were, will just shift towards what is seen as more unconventional things from our point of view today. But
I think the business and economic landscape is going to continue to change. And I think a lot of the kind of the old ways that we've had in like agreements and the things that are important of like, okay, you've got to have this education, or you've got to check this box, or you got to do this thing, or we're going to do it the way we've always done it. I don't know if that's going to hold up anymore over the next couple of years. And then with astrology, Ayurveda, metaphysics, like whatever, everything is kind of being blown open right now. It's like, I think we're going to see the wave is still cresting, and I think it's going to crest over the next couple of years as we see astrology and these kind of things get more and more into the mainstream. I don't know what's going to happen after that in like 2026, 27, 28. Who knows, but it seems like it's still kind of cresting. I think it's becoming more normalized to do this stuff and talk about it. I mean, I started studying astrology 30 years ago, and I was embarrassed to tell people. People would laugh at you. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That must have been hard because like this kind of pre-internet society, you probably see the market is going to shift towards these more alternative. Like the alternative modalities will no longer be considered alternative. One important question I did want to ask: how, because obviously with the tropical Vedic, so much of the karmas are such an integral part of that system. The chart is showing the karmas, and the transits are showing the possible pathways as a result of the karmas. But in human design, we have a decision-making feature. Now, surely the decision-making feature of human design alters the karma in some way. How does the karma of, okay, I've got an emotional authority, so I'm going to pay attention to that now, and maybe I'll make this decision, go for this job. How does those karmas not contradict the karmas in the chart and in transits?
I would say I'm mostly of the position that all this stuff is pretty much written out. It's predetermined. I didn't start this way. I was absolutely on the side of free will and choice and all of that. But I've looked at enough of it over the years where I've begrudgingly, slowly, and with resistance changed my mind. And now I'm just like, I think that on a certain level, it's all fated. It's all written from the moment we're born. Within that, there's a little bit of wiggle room with the small stuff, but the big stuff is kind of set. You're gonna get divorced at this time, and there's nothing you can do about it. You're gonna have a child at this time, and there's nothing you can do about it either way. That's like I said, that's not something I've come to easily, but that's where I seem to be sitting right now. And so I feel like everything in the chart, there is a pattern, there's an itinerary, there's a program, there's a blueprint. The question for me is just how much of that is set in stone. I don't know that 100% is, but I think a lot of it is. Everything is going to play out the way it's going to play out. And I think human design and astrology are just showing us two different views of things. Depending on what system you're looking through, it's going to look different. And you're going to be able to see a different aspect of what's essentially kind of a multi-dimensional holographic reality that we're in. I think it's more a matter of interpretation than it is contradiction.
Like, I'm not disputing that there's going to be a certain level of predeterminism, because I've seen a lot of the Vedic techniques play out really well. I see even in the Hellenistic tradition, they have zodiacal releasing, which seems to be incredibly accurate, giving zodiacal releasing, giving these peak periods. But if we have a decision-making process in human design, are you saying like that could be seen in the chart? You know, if someone has an astrological chart, you can see a transit happening. It's like, oh, it looks like you're going to be offered a new job and you're going to take that job and you're going to go for it. But then you have the human design authority, whatever it is, and this guy says, well, checking in with my authority, I don't want to go with that job. You know, the astrological chart, you're saying it could predict and show that the person has taken on the decision making from human design, and as a result of that, the outcome goes that way. So you're saying like it's so fated that it's kind of the transits could show, well, you're gonna run into human design, you're gonna start doing your decisions this way, and as a result of that decision making process, you're gonna land up here. Like it's that level of detail.
Yeah, I think there's an illusion of choice. It's more beneficial for us to think that we have choice, to operate as if we have choice. But what I've seen in human design is where we really don't have choice is in our authority, in our decision-making process, to the point of, you know, my partner and I, Amy and I, will refer to it sometimes as decision watching, not decision making. We're actually watching, we're watching the sacral center respond. The person doesn't get to choose how their sacral center responds. I have a will, heart, ego-based authority. And so it's like when my authority kicks in, I don't feel like I have any choice. I have to do this. I mean, and it's painful for me not to do this. It's harmful for me not to do this. I have to do it, or there's no point in doing anything. It's like such a big...
It's almost like a mental health benefit. It's like, you know, I'm going to do this decision out of my authority because I have, you know, I now recognize my authority and I'm going to make that decision, and that may be a fated outcome. But what if someone has not been introduced to human design and you know, makes decisions from not self? You're saying even that could be fated. It's like the fact that they won't run into their own authority making process. And on a separate point, you're sort of saying once the awareness comes online, oh yeah, I have this decision making process, it becomes a lot more natural and mentally healthy to make the decisions that way, so that the individual person is more comfortable and healthy with making the decisions that way. So in the moment, it feels like this is the mentally healthy thing to do. I'm happy to make that choice. But in the bigger picture, the outcome of that result is fated.
It's a way of kind of relaxing, honoring, and relaxing into our true nature. And if we understand, or we can kind of go with our nature, then yeah, we can relax. We can hopefully enjoy the ride a bit more. They can hopefully give us a psychological perspective on things that allows our minds to relax a little bit more and kind of loosen our grip and just kind of live. You know? Yeah,
because both maps are using their intellect to point it to its own awareness. Because both human design is saying, here's the intellectual map. Now pay attention to your awareness and your witness consciousness, which is very similar to all the Eastern Indian spiritual things, where it's all about, okay, here's how your life is going to go, but you need to realize that you're this conscious entity. Both seem to have that in common, where, you know, regardless of the decisions being made, there's an emphasis on the witness consciousness. In the Indian tradition, that's all, you know, the Atman and all the rest of it. But they both seem to have that in common. So it's almost like both systems are like surface level helpful for people because they understand more about themselves and they've got these tools to frame their experiences in. But ultimately, they're both about maximizing the consciousness aspect of the individual, regardless of what happens. You're saying that even if they quote unquote use both systems, what will happen anyway. But the use of those systems is a healthy, temporary psychological benefit for the person.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, I agree.
So that doesn't take away the validity of the psychological healthfulness. You know, you say, oh well, even if you use the system or if you don't use the system, your fate won't change. But that doesn't take away the very real relief of suffering and kind of understanding that the systems and the worldview of both can hear from it.
Yeah, so that I'm glad I think you've got it, and I'm glad you brought it up that way, because basically there's necessary suffering and there's unnecessary suffering. There's suffering that you're just here for. It's, you know, life is going to be difficult at times. You're going to have challenges. That's kind of we need that on a certain level, you know, to to grow and to increase our consciousness. And I feel like there's necessary suffering. And then there's all this unnecessary suffering, which is us just kind of like denying what we are, trying to be something we're not, trying to go against nature, trying to go against ourselves, we're getting all twisted up about what we think we should be doing and other people think we should be doing. That's the stuff that I think, in theory, at least, that human design and probably some good astrology can address, and then say, stop doing all that other stuff and just do this other thing. Just try it on. Just relax. See how it goes, and then see if you basically you get the suffering that you're here for, and you don't get the bullshit suffering.
That is a genuine massive benefit, because it could be 30 to 40% of the suffering is like the mental constructs, as you say, a lot of the not self stuff and all of this unnecessary stuff, which is kind of the one level of suffering. And both systems are saying, put that away, which can really help, but then go on this path, which you're going to go on anyway, and face whatever comes from that, and just kind of forget about the rest of the stuff. So in that way, it's both predetermined, but it doesn't mean that the value isn't less real in terms of cutting away this level of unnecessary suffering and continuing to use those two maps to help reduce that suffering along the way. And then the decision-making process will be like, okay, I made this decision. Here's the immediate problem that I've got, and I might suffer that. But the trajectory is going on in the way that the astrological chart might indicate. But you're really just getting rid of the unnecessary suffering that you were doing to yourself. So in that way, it's still incredibly valuable for the person. The fact that it's fated doesn't take away from the real benefit of reducing that suffering.
Yeah, I think so. I think we can kick, scream, and protest less along the way, and just kind of I think the Stoics were onto something. Just the idea of accepting one's fate and then showing up for it and trying to do it the best one can, and being a certain kind of person or whatever, or operating from a certain kind of spirit. I feel like that's where I've ended up with it, and everything you're saying in your kind of the way you're hearing me and summarizing, I think you're right. That's the way I'm looking at it. And
there's value in the brainworks. Generally reduce a lot of people's mental suffering, and you can send them on the correct paths, regardless of whether that means it's a better life or a not better life. It's just like, this is the life that you're actually meant to be suffering or not.
Yeah. I mean, that's been when I work with people, I sit down and do a session with someone, I'm always just trying to support their truest expression of themselves. It's like, I just want to get them back to themselves, or in alignment with themselves, so that they can accept themselves, love themselves, and be like, all right, well, it's good to be me. I mean, if I can convey some of that and say, and then a little bit of like, hey, you can do it. You're not alone out there. Other people are struggling with some of the same stuff, or, there are people out there who can relate and resonate. It's like, if I can convey some of that, I feel like maybe I can make a little bit of a difference, but
it's a huge weight off people's minds, because I don't think, and no previous generation would have had access to that level of, oh shit, other people are like this and I'm not an alien on this earth. Or my parents' generation, they would have just stuck to what they were doing and suffered all sorts of nonsense because of it, because they had no resource or information to say, you're not an alien actually, and you should be confident in yourself, and you don't have to just do this system. And I think it could be especially valuable to younger people now, because there's all of the internet influence. The internet is just screaming at them. It's not even go and get a job and get a degree and do a family. It's not even that. It's like there's a billion things on top of that being thrown at them every day. So both the astrology and the human design can just kind of cut away the bullshit and be like, here's what it is. I know it's another piece of information on top of what they're getting, but it's about, okay, get rid of all of this, filter everything through. This is your human design chart. This is your tropical astrology chart, So it's good to hear that there is, a lot of genuine psychological benefit. I would like to be able to bring it to people who are not in a occult or new age circle, because you've got so many people going to therapy now. They're seeking something out of that. There's all sorts of new therapies coming out. So tons of people are seeking things, and how do we take these systems, either astrology, which has existed for thousands of years, or this relatively new human design, and get that to the common person without freaking them out?
I think if you can, I try to use like everyday language to the degree I can, which is kind of tough sometimes because there's a lot of like specific terminology in human design.
Yeah.
If you start speaking like a human design robot, you're gonna sound weird in any other aspect of life or any other field. If you come in, you're like talking about like and the planet's this and the planet's that. It's like
people are gonna run away.
It's like, go try that in a corporate environment. You know what I mean? It's like, and so I think you can put it in more of a non-alienating everyday language if you can meet people where they're at, talk about what's going on in their life. I mean, honestly, I've always kind of bristled at the whole like life coach kind of like label, and then I'm like, what the hell is a life coach? But then because maybe some of the excesses of whatever was associated with that, but I'm starting to kind of see it. I'm like, I think that's a lot of what people need. They need some sort of like point of reference, some way of connecting to something outside of themselves that can either reinforce or support them. Someone who's got a different point of awareness that can maybe point things out that maybe they're missing. Now that could be a therapist, that could be a coach, that could be a teacher, that could be a mentor, that could be a lot of things. But I'm encouraging people to basically do what they would do in their own life, what they feel motivated, moved, or interested in. And then if human design fits into that, then see how you can incorporate human design in a way that you can then get it across to whoever's, on your fractal, whoever is in your field or in your network. And, but I know that if people start like acting weird and culty and speaking in like foreign languages, like, that no one can understand, it's like, it's not going to go over very well.
No, you have to be able to translate it down into like even basic concepts. Same for like a normal therapist. They might have all sorts of theories, but they need to translate it down into a layman's terms. It's so valuable to me to know that there's people like yourself who are blending the two and actually helping people. Both of these systems I'm fascinated with and have been most helpful for me. So I would just like to pass that on to other people,
That's an example of what I mean by, you kind of go with your natural inclinations, and if human design or astrology is reinforcing that, then it's like you can just kind of relax into it and be like, all right, well, I'm not going to worry about this other shit. I'm just going to focus on the stuff that I feel I want to be doing, and that these systems are, kind of confirming in their own way, and we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, because it's really that excitement and that liberation that you get. That's such a massive psychological benefit. It can really improve someone's mental health. But it's to know that I'm not an alien.
I think people. I mean, it's said all the time in human design, but I think people actually forget or put it aside that it really is an experiment. It's like this. A lot of this stuff has not been fleshed out. It's not been tested. It's not been verified. Some of it has. There are things that seem like they hold up more than others. That's okay. There's a lot to study. There's a lot to explore. It's covering a lot of ground. And I don't know if we'll ever get to a point where all of it's explained or verified, but it's interesting. There's something to it. It seems like it's hard to shake. You can't quite unsee it once it lands. Sometimes I feel like human design is like some sort of virus that's been like injected into into the simulation. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's like
spreads out.
Like what? It's like I had this whole thought once where I was like, man, what if this thing really is a simulation and there's like some like higher order like entity who's like the equivalent of like a developer or a coder, who then said, hey, let's inject this virus into this system and then see what happens. Let's see what these guys do with this.
Yeah.
I know that that's probably not exactly what it is, but it's entertaining to think of that way because it does feel like, you can't quite get rid of it, which is interesting once you see it.
I agree. I think in my view, you've got all of the ancient Indian and the Vedic texts, and they have distinct ways that knowledge is gained. And one of those ways, is like the divine inspiration, divine download. And they have documented that in their Vedas and their ancient texts as a genuine epistemological way of getting knowledge. So I just feel that human design it could be another one of those downloads, which is just perfectly suited to the modern Western culture because we're such a tech-based culture. So it almost makes perfect sense. Just make it very techy, make it centers, make it like a circuit board, gates and the lines and numbers. it's like a laptop. It's like technology. It certainly resonates with the technological culture more than like, oh yeah, you have a Anuradha nakshatra and, you know, Lord Shiva gives you blessings if you do this. That kind of doesn't hold up anymore, but there's truth in that. So I suppose what I'm getting at is, you know, both at the same time, which is what you're doing, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
It's basically, you look at the black and the red. You look at like what you, like the centers. What do the centers represent? What is definition? What is openness? Yeah. And then you get into aura type and strategy and authority. Then you get into profile. Then you get into the channels, the gates, the circuits. And that's it. And I think most people, that is plenty of information to go out there and work with it for the rest of one's life.
It's been super, super valuable for me. And it's been a weight off my shoulder just to be able to speak with an actual human who's into both of these systems. You know, because it makes me feel like, oh, I'm not an alien. Like, I'm not the only one who's doing both of these. Like, finally, there's somebody else who's actually doing it. It's so helpful to have that. So helpful to have that.
Well, my pleasure. I've enjoyed the conversation. It's been nice to meet. And, you know, I think we, you know, shouldn't forget the human part of human design. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Right, exactly. That's so funny. That's how it gets missed, right?
It's like, it's not about becoming robots, guys. Or, you know.
Yeah. That's so funny.
Well, I appreciate you reaching out. It's been nice to connect. And if you have any other questions or you want to bounce something off me, feel free to reach out.
Thanks so much, John. I really appreciate it. Okay, have a good day.
You too. Bye.